Welcome to my channel. In this video you will see 32 true horror stories. If you like the video, do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel to motivate and support us. Let's get started. Emily's heart raced with excitement and nerves as she approached the old mansion nestled deep within the forest. It was her first day on the job as a caretaker for the reclusive Mr. Harrington, a wealthy eccentric who rarely left his sprawling estate. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the overgrown path leading to the mansion's imposing front doors. She shivered, a chill running down her spine as she stepped into the dimly lit foyer. Mr. Harrington greeted her with a stern nod, his piercing gaze making her uneasy. "Welcome, Emily. You'll find everything you need in the staff quarters," he said, his voice echoing through the empty halls. "But remember, there are rules here that must be followed." Emily nodded, her apprehension growing with each passing moment. She followed Mr. Harrington's instructions, settling into her modest room in the servants' quarters. As night fell, she tried to shake off her unease, reminding herself that it was just first-day jitters. But as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak and groan of the old mansion sent shivers down her spine. She pulled the covers tighter around her, trying to block out the oppressive darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. Just as she was about to drift off to sleep, she heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the other side of the wall. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest as the scratching grew louder, more insistent. With trembling hands, she reached for the bedside lamp and flicked it on, casting a feeble light into the room. The scratching stopped abruptly, and Emily let out a shaky breath, convinced it must have been her imagination. But then she heard it again, closer this time, coming from the window beside her bed. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the curtains, fear coursing through her veins. Summoning her courage, she pulled back the curtain, expecting to find nothing but the darkness of the night. But instead, she found herself face to face with a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her from the inky blackness outside. She gasped, stumbling back in horror as a low growl echoed through the room. Heart pounding, Emily scrambled for the door, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the lock. She threw it open and bolted into the hallway, the sound of her own footsteps echoing in her ears. But as she raced toward the stairs, she realized she wasn't alone. A figure stepped out from the shadows, blocking her path. It was Mr. Harrington, his eyes glinting in the dim light as he advanced toward her. "You shouldn't have looked," he said, his voice cold and menacing. "You've broken the rules, Emily. And now you must pay the price." Emily's breath caught in her throat as she backed away, her mind racing with fear and confusion. What had she stumbled into? What dark secrets lay hidden within the walls of the mansion? Before she could find out, a hand closed around her wrist, pulling her back into the darkness. She screamed, thrashing against her captor as they dragged her down into the depths of the mansion. She fought with all her strength, but it was no use. The darkness consumed her, swallowing her screams as she was pulled into its depths. Hours later, the sun rose over the forest, casting its golden light across the deserted mansion. Inside, all was quiet once more, save for the faint sound of scratching coming from the walls. And somewhere, deep within the shadows, the watcher waited, hungry for its next victim. It was a stormy night in the small town of Willow Creek. The rain hammered against the windows of the old Victorian house, and the wind howled like a banshee. Inside, Sarah anxiously waited for her dinner to arrive. She had ordered from a new food delivery service that promised fast delivery, even in the worst weather. As the clock struck midnight, there was a knock at the door. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Something felt off, but hunger got the best of her, and she opened the door. Standing on the porch was a figure shrouded in darkness, holding a dripping wet bag of food. Sarah couldn't make out any features, just a silhouette against the dim glow of the streetlights. "Your delivery, miss," a raspy voice said from beneath the hood. Sarah took the bag, her fingers brushing against the cold, clammy hand that held it. She thanked the delivery person, who simply nodded and turned to leave. But as they walked away, Sarah noticed something strange about their gait. It was jerky, almost unnatural, like a marionette being controlled by invisible strings. Shrugging off the unease, Sarah closed the door and carried the food to the kitchen. She set it down on the table and opened the bag, the aroma of spices and herbs wafting up to greet her. Despite her earlier apprehension, her stomach growled in anticipation. As she began to eat, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The food tasted strange, like it had been seasoned with something other than spices. She pushed the thought aside, attributing it to her imagination running wild on such a spooky night. But as she took another bite, she felt a sharp pain in her mouth. Spitting out the morsel, she was horrified to see a small, wriggling worm squirming on her plate. Panic surged through her veins as she realized what she had just ingested. Frantically, Sarah rushed to the sink, trying to wash away the taste of decay and filth. But as she looked out the window, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The figure from earlier was standing in her yard, motionless, staring up at her with empty, soulless eyes. Terrified, Sarah stumbled back from the window, her heart pounding in her chest. She fumbled for her phone, desperate to call for help, but it slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered to the floor. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the kitchen. Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. Slowly, she crept back into the room, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. And then she saw it. The shadows seemed to coalesce into a swirling mass, twisting and writhing like a living entity. Within seconds, it had formed into the shape of a grotesque figure, its features twisted into a sinister grin. Sarah's scream echoed through the house as the shadowy apparition lunged towards her, tendrils reaching out to ensnare her in its grasp. She stumbled backwards, desperately trying to escape, but it was no use. The darkness enveloped her, swallowing her whole. Hours later, the storm subsided, and the first rays of dawn began to peek through the clouds. The residents of Willow Creek awoke to find Sarah's house eerily quiet, with no sign of life inside. When the authorities arrived, they discovered a scene straight from a nightmare. The furniture was overturned. The walls were splattered with blood, and there was no trace of Sarah anywhere. The only clue to her fate was the open door and the soggy remnants of a food delivery bag lying on the porch. To this day, the people of Willow Creek speak in hushed tones about the mysterious disappearance of Sarah and the horrors that lurk in the darkness of the night. And though the truth may never be known, one thing is certain: sometimes, the things that go bump in the night are far more terrifying than we could ever imagine. This is our story. Let's start the story. In the dim glow of his computer screen, Mark sat alone in his room, immersed in the virtual world of a horror game. His heart raced as he navigated through dark corridors, his footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The game had a reputation for being the scariest in virtual reality, but Mark prided himself on his bravery. Little did he know, the terror he was about to face would transcend the boundaries of the digital realm. As Mark delved deeper into the game, strange occurrences began to unfold in his room. The air grew colder, and shadows seemed to dance in the corners of his vision. He shrugged it off as his imagination playing tricks on him, blaming the immersive nature of the game for his heightened senses. But then, he heard it, a faint whisper, like a distant echo reverberating through the walls. Mark froze, his fingers trembling on the controller. He scanned the room, but there was nothing there. Just him and the virtual world projected before him. Shaking off the unease, Mark continued to play, determined to conquer the game. Yet, with each passing moment, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. It was as if someone, or something, was trying to communicate with him from beyond the screen. As he reached a particularly tense moment in the game, Mark felt a chill run down his spine. He could sense a presence looming behind him, its icy breath sending shivers down his spine. He dared not turn around, fearing what he might see. Suddenly, the game glitched, a flicker of static followed by darkness. Mark ripped off his virtual reality headset, his heart pounding in his chest. But the darkness remained, engulfing him in its suffocating embrace. Panic surged through his veins as he fumbled for the light switch, but when he finally flicked it on, he wished he hadn't. Standing before him, bathed in the sickly glow of the monitor, was a figure shrouded in darkness. Its eyes gleamed with a malevolent light, boring into Mark's soul with an intensity that sent a wave of terror coursing through him. Unable to tear his gaze away, Mark watched in horror as the figure reached out a spectral hand, its fingers stretching impossibly long as they closed in on him. With a scream, he stumbled backward, desperate to escape the nightmare unfolding before him. But no matter how far he ran, the darkness followed, consuming everything in its path. Mark found himself trapped in a nightmarish limbo, where reality and fiction blurred into a twisted tapestry of horror. Hours passed, or perhaps it was days, Mark couldn't be sure, as he wandered through the labyrinthine corridors of his own mind. Everywhere he turned, the figure lurked, its presence a constant reminder of his own mortality. Just when Mark thought he couldn't bear another moment of torment, he stumbled upon a glimmer of hope, a faint light flickering in the distance. With renewed determination, he followed its beacon, his steps faltering as he drew closer to the source. As he emerged from the depths of the darkness, Mark found himself back in his room, the familiar hum of his computer filling the air. But something was different, the whispers had ceased, and the figure was nowhere to be seen. With a trembling hand, Mark reached for his virtual reality headset, hesitating for a moment before placing it back over his eyes. The game resumed as if nothing had happened, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he had glimpsed something beyond the confines of the digital world, a darkness that threatened to consume him whole. From that day forward, Mark swore off horror games, haunted by the memory of his brush with the unknown. But try as he might to escape, the whispers lingered, a constant reminder of the thin veil that separates reality from the horrors that lie just beyond. In the dense, mist-laden forest of Ravenswood, an aura of unease lingered, whispered by the wind and echoed by the rustling leaves. It was said that those who ventured into its depths risked encountering the spirits of the forgotten, the lost souls who wandered the earth seeking solace. Among these spirits was the tale of Eliza, a young woman whose tragic fate bound her to the shadows. Legend had it that Eliza, once a radiant beauty, had been lured into the woods by a mysterious force. Some whispered of a forbidden love, others of a dark pact made under the light of the full moon. Whatever the truth, Eliza vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and broken hearts. On a moonless night, a group of friends dared each other to explore Ravenswood, eager for a thrill. Among them was Sarah, a skeptic who scoffed at the tales of Eliza and her haunted forest. Leading the way with a flashlight in hand, she urged her friends to follow, their laughter echoing through the darkness. As they delved deeper into the woods, the air grew thick with an unnatural chill, and the trees seemed to close in around them like gnarled fingers. Sarah's bravado waned, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. Ignoring her unease, she pressed on, determined to prove the stories wrong. But soon, their laughter turned to nervous whispers as strange sounds echoed through the trees. Branches snapped under unseen weight, and eerie whispers danced on the wind. Sarah's friends grew uneasy, casting nervous glances at the shadows that danced at the edge of their vision. Suddenly, Sarah's flashlight flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Panic surged through her veins as she fumbled for her phone, the feeble glow offering little solace. It was then that they heard it, a haunting melody, carried on the wind like a mournful lament. Frozen in fear, they followed the sound, their footsteps swallowed by the dense undergrowth. The melody led them deeper into the heart of Ravenswood, where the trees stood sentinel like silent guardians. And there, bathed in moonlight, they saw her, Eliza, her form ethereal and her eyes empty voids. Sarah's friends recoiled in horror, their screams drowned out by the pounding of their hearts. But Sarah remained rooted to the spot, her gaze locked with Eliza's. There was a sadness in those empty eyes, a longing that reached out to her across the divide. With a voice like silk, Eliza beckoned to Sarah, her ghostly hand outstretched. Unable to resist, Sarah took a hesitant step forward, her mind clouded by a strange compulsion. But as she drew closer, she saw the truth hidden in Eliza's gaze, a darkness that hungered for souls. With a cry of horror, Sarah stumbled back, her friends rallying around her. Together, they fled through the forest, pursued by the echoes of Eliza's laughter. But no matter how far they ran, they could not escape the shadowed path that lay before them. As dawn broke, they emerged from Ravenswood, their bodies bruised and their minds haunted by the horrors they had witnessed. But even as they left the forest behind, they knew that the memory of Eliza would linger, a spectre of the darkness that lurked within us all. And somewhere, in the depths of Ravenswood, her whispered melody echoed on the wind, a warning to those who dared to tread where the shadows danced. In the heart of the countryside, nestled amidst rolling hills and whispering woods, stood Blackwater Manor, a grand estate with a dark history. For generations, tales of tragedy and despair had shrouded its walls, whispered by locals in hushed tones. But for Charlotte, inheriting the manor was a dream come true, or so she thought. As the last surviving heir, Charlotte was drawn to the sprawling estate like a moth to flame. Ignoring the warnings of her relatives, she embraced the opportunity to restore the once majestic manor to its former glory. But from the moment she crossed its threshold, an icy chill settled in her bones, and she knew that Blackwater held secrets darker than she could ever imagine. The first night in the manor, Charlotte was plagued by restless dreams, visions of shadowy figures and echoing whispers that left her gasping for air. When she awoke, she found herself alone in the darkness, the silence broken only by the mournful howl of the wind. Determined to shake off her unease, Charlotte threw herself into the restoration efforts, but the manor seemed to resist her every attempt. Paint peeled from the walls, floorboards creaked beneath her feet, and a pervasive sense of dread hung heavy in the air. Despite her best efforts, Blackwater remained shrouded in darkness, its secrets just out of reach. As the days turned to weeks, strange occurrences became commonplace, a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye, a cold breath against her neck, objects moving of their own accord. Each incident left Charlotte more unnerved than the last, but she refused to admit defeat. She was determined to uncover the truth behind Blackwater's haunting. One stormy night, as lightning split the sky and thunder shook the earth, Charlotte ventured into the depths of the manor's forgotten wing, a labyrinth of dusty corridors and hidden chambers. With each step, the air grew heavier, and the darkness seemed to press in around her like suffocating tendrils. In the heart of the wing, she discovered a hidden staircase, its steps worn with age and neglect. With a trembling hand, she reached out and descended into the depths below, guided only by the faint glow of her flashlight. What she found at the bottom would haunt her for the rest of her days. In the dim light, Charlotte stumbled upon a forgotten chamber, an altar bathed in flickering candlelight, symbols etched into the walls, and a sense of malevolence that hung heavy in the air. It was then that she heard it, the sound of chanting, low and guttural, echoing through the darkness. With growing horror, Charlotte realized that she was not alone. Figures clad in tattered robes emerged from the shadows, their faces twisted with madness and malice. In their midst stood a figure cloaked in darkness, its eyes burning like smoldering coals. Paralyzed with fear, Charlotte watched as the figure approached, its outstretched hand beckoning her closer. But before she could react, the ground trembled beneath her feet, and the chamber erupted in chaos. The figures screamed in agony as the walls shook and the very air crackled with energy. In a blind panic, Charlotte fled from the chamber, racing through the labyrinthine corridors as the manor itself seemed to come alive around her. But no matter how fast she ran, she could not escape the darkness that pursued her, its tendrils reaching out to claim her soul. As dawn broke, Charlotte emerged from the manor, her body battered and her spirit broken. She knew then that Blackwater Manor was more than just a house, it was a prison for souls bound by a curse as old as time itself. And though she vowed never to return, she could still feel the manor's presence lurking in the shadows, waiting to ensnare its next victim in its icy grasp. For in the heart of Blackwater, the true horror lay not in the darkness that dwelled within its walls, but in the darkness that dwelled within us all. It was a frigid winter night when Officer Jack Reynolds received the call. A disturbance had been reported at the abandoned Greystone Manor on the outskirts of town. As he drove through the empty streets, the sense of foreboding grew with each passing mile. Greystone Manor had long been rumored to be haunted, its dark history shrouded in mystery and tragedy. Arriving at the manor, Jack was greeted by an eerie silence that seemed to suffocate the air. With his flashlight in hand and his heart pounding in his chest, he ventured into the decrepit building, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. The interior was cloaked in shadows, broken only by the beam of Jack's flashlight. Dust motes danced in the faint light, and the air was heavy with the scent of decay. Jack's instincts screamed at him to turn back, but duty compelled him forward. As he explored the winding corridors, he caught fleeting glimpses of movement out of the corner of his eye. Each time he turned, there was nothing but darkness staring back at him. But the feeling of being watched never waned, a chill creeping down his spine. Suddenly, a sound pierced the silence, a soft, whispering voice that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. Jack strained to make out the words, but they were nothing more than unintelligible murmurs, like the echoes of tortured souls trapped in limbo. Heart pounding, Jack followed the whispers deeper into the manor, his nerve stretched taut as a bowstring. It was then that he stumbled upon the source of the disturbance, a room bathed in flickering candlelight, its walls adorned with arcane symbols and grotesque images. In the center of the room stood a figure draped in black, their features obscured by the shadows. Jack's hand tightened around his gun as he called out, demanding that the figure show themselves. But instead of answering, the figure simply turned and vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the echo of their laughter. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Jack knew that he was not alone in Greystone Manor. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, and the whispers grew louder, their words twisting and warping into a cacophony of madness. Desperate to escape the suffocating darkness, Jack fled through the corridors, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But no matter how fast he ran, the manor seemed to stretch on endlessly, its walls closing in around him like a vice. Just when Jack thought he could take no more, he stumbled upon a hidden staircase leading down into the bowels of the manor. With no other options left, he descended into the depths, his footsteps echoing through the darkness. What he found below chilled him to the core, a network of tunnels, their walls lined with rusted chains and cages. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the whispers grew deafening, swirling around him like a malevolent storm. But amidst the darkness, Jack saw something that made his blood run cold, a series of makeshift altars, each adorned with grisly trophies. Human bones littered the ground, their pale forms gleaming in the dim light. Realization dawned on Jack like a lead weight in his chest. Greystone Manor was not haunted by ghosts, but by something far more sinister, something that hungered for flesh and blood. With a trembling hand, Jack radioed for backup, his voice barely above a whisper. But as he waited in the suffocating darkness, he knew that he was not alone. Somewhere in the shadows, the true horror of Greystone Manor waited patiently, its whispers beckoning him ever closer. In the quaint town of Willowbrook, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, stood an old Victorian mansion known as Blackwood Manor. It was a place of fascination and fear, its imposing facade casting a shadow over the surrounding landscape. But for Lily Harper, it was home. Lily had inherited the mansion from her eccentric grandmother, a woman rumored to dabble in the occult. Despite the whispers that surrounded Blackwood Manor, Lily felt drawn to its mysterious halls, eager to uncover the secrets hidden within its walls. One stormy night, as the wind howled outside and rain lashed against the windows, Lily found herself drawn to the attic. It was a place she rarely ventured, filled with dusty relics of a bygone era. But tonight, something called to her from the darkness. As she climbed the creaking stairs, her heart raced with anticipation. The attic was shrouded in shadows, the only light filtering in through stained glass windows. But amidst the darkness, Lily's eyes were drawn to a tarnished mirror tucked away in the corner. Approaching the mirror, Lily saw her reflection staring back at her, its features twisted into a grotesque mockery of her own. Fear clawed at her throat as she reached out to touch the glass, but as her fingers made contact, a cold chill washed over her. Suddenly, the reflection shifted, morphing into a scene of unimaginable horror. Lily watched in horror as her mirror image writhed in agony, its skin contorted and eyes filled with madness. A voice whispered in her mind, urging her to flee, but something held her rooted to the spot. With a gasp, Lily stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. The mirror returned to its normal state, but the memory of what she had seen lingered like a stain on her soul. Determined to uncover the truth, Lily delved into the mansion's history, uncovering dark secrets that had long been buried. It was said that Blackwood Manor had once been home to a powerful sorceress who dabbled in dark magic. Legend had it that she had created the mirror as a portal to the realm of the dead, using it to trap the souls of those who dared to gaze into its depths. As Lily delved deeper into the mystery, she began to experience strange occurrences within the mansion. Shadows danced at the edge of her vision, and whispers echoed through the halls. But it was the mirror that held the true terror, its surface pulsing with an otherworldly energy. Desperate to break the curse, Lily sought out the help of a local historian, hoping to uncover the mirror's origins. Together, they unearthed a hidden chamber beneath the mansion, its walls adorned with arcane symbols and ancient texts. It was there that they found the key to breaking the curse, a ritual that required the blood of the mirror's creator. With trembling hands, Lily performed the ritual, chanting the incantation as the mirror's surface rippled like water. At last, the curse was broken, and the mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces. But as Lily stood amidst the wreckage, she couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered in the darkness, waiting to be unleashed. Years passed, and the memory of the mirror faded into legend. But for Lily, the horrors she had witnessed would forever haunt her dreams, a reminder of the darkness that lurked within Blackwood Manor. And somewhere, in the depths of the old Victorian mansion, the shadows whispered of a power yet to be unleashed. It was an old mansion, nestled at the edge of town, its crumbling facade a testament to years gone by. Ivy snaked its way up the walls, obscuring the windows like a shroud of secrecy. Most of the townsfolk avoided the place, whispering tales of curses and hauntings that clung to its time-worn halls. But for Emily, a curious young journalist with a penchant for the macabre, the mansion was irresistible. She had heard rumors of a hidden room, one that held secrets untold. Armed with her camera and a determination to uncover the truth, Emily ventured into the depths of the mansion, her footsteps echoing ominously in the empty corridors. The air inside was heavy with dust, the only sound the creaking of floorboards beneath her feet. As she explored further, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as though unseen eyes followed her every move. Finally, she stumbled upon a door tucked away in a forgotten corner of the mansion. It was covered in cobwebs, its surface warped with age. With trembling hands, Emily pushed it open, revealing a staircase leading down into darkness. Ignoring the warning bells ringing in her mind, Emily descended into the depths below. The air grew colder with each step, sending shivers down her spine. But still, she pressed on, her curiosity overpowering her fear. At the bottom of the staircase, Emily found herself in a dimly lit room, its walls lined with shelves filled with dusty artifacts. But it was what lay in the center of the room that sent a chill down her spine, a solitary coffin, its lid slightly ajar. Heart pounding, Emily approached the coffin, her hands trembling as she reached out to push the lid open. Inside, she found not a body, but a collection of old journals, their pages yellowed with age. As she flipped through the journals, Emily's eyes widened in horror. They spoke of dark rituals and sacrifices, of a family cursed by their own greed and ambition. And at the center of it all was the mansion itself, a beacon for malevolent forces drawn to the darkness that dwelled within its walls. But before Emily could fully grasp the magnitude of what she had uncovered, she heard a sound behind her, a soft, rasping breath that sent shivers down her spine. Whirling around, She saw a figure emerging from the shadows, a spectral presence with eyes that burned like embers in the darkness. Paralyzed with fear, Emily could only watch as the figure drew closer, its form shifting and warping with each step. And then, with a voice that seemed to echo from beyond the grave, it spoke. "You should not have come here," it said, its words sending a chill through Emily's soul. "This place is not meant for the living." With a desperate cry, Emily turned and fled, racing up the stairs and out into the night. But even as she escaped the mansion's grasp, she knew that she would never truly be free from its haunting presence. For in the darkness, something stirred, a force older and more malevolent than anything she could have imagined. And as Emily's footsteps faded into the night, it whispered a promise, one that chilled her to the bone. "We will meet again," it said. "And when we do, you will be ours forevermore." This is our story today. In the small town of Ravenswood, nestled between towering pine trees and mist-covered hills, there stood an old Victorian house that locals whispered about in hushed tones. It was said to be haunted, its halls echoing with the footsteps of those long gone. Despite the warnings, Sarah, a young artist seeking solitude and inspiration, decided to rent the house for the summer. As Sarah settled into her new home, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision, disappearing whenever she turned to look. Brushing it off as her imagination, she focused on her paintings, losing herself in swirls of color and emotion. One night, as she worked late into the evening, a chill crept through the house, causing her to shiver despite the warmth of her studio. Glancing up, she caught a glimpse of something in the mirror across the room, a dark figure standing just beyond the reflection of her canvas. Heart pounding, Sarah turned around, but the room was empty. Dismissing it as a trick of the light, she returned to her work, the sensation of being watched growing stronger with each passing moment. As days turned into weeks, Sarah's unease only intensified. Whispers echoed through the house at night, faint and indistinct, yet unmistakably human. She tried to convince herself it was just the old house settling, but deep down, she knew something was wrong. One evening, while cleaning the attic, Sarah stumbled upon a dusty old journal hidden beneath a pile of forgotten belongings. Its pages were filled with the ramblings of a previous tenant, detailing encounters with a malevolent presence lurking within the house. According to the journal, the entity was a shadow, a manifestation of all the fear and suffering that had permeated the walls over the years. It fed on the despair of the living, growing stronger with each passing day. Terrified, Sarah knew she had to leave, but something held her back. She couldn't abandon her art, her sanctuary, despite the growing dread that consumed her every waking moment. That night, as she lay in bed, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever before. Unable to bear it any longer, Sarah fled to her studio, seeking refuge amidst her paintings. But the shadows were waiting for her there, swirling and coalescing into a sinister form that loomed over her like a dark cloud. Frozen in terror, Sarah watched as the figure reached out a hand that mirrored her own in every detail. With a sickening realization, Sarah understood, the shadow was not separate from her, but a part of her, born from the depths of her own fear and loneliness. Desperate to escape, she tore her gaze away from the mirror, only to find herself face to face with her doppelganger, its eyes empty voids devoid of humanity. In that moment, Sarah knew she had to confront her fears or be consumed by them. Summoning all her courage, she reached out and touched the mirror, the glass cool beneath her fingertips. As she did, the shadow recoiled, its form flickering and fading until it vanished entirely, leaving Sarah alone in the darkness. In the days that followed, Sarah made peace with the shadow within, embracing it as a part of herself rather than a source of fear. With newfound clarity, she poured her emotions onto the canvas, creating art that spoke to the depths of her soul. And though the whispers never truly ceased, Sarah learned to live with them, drawing strength from the knowledge that she had faced her demons and emerged stronger for it. As she packed her belongings and prepared to leave Ravenswood behind, Sarah couldn't help but glance back at the old Victorian house one last time, wondering what other secrets lay hidden within its walls, waiting to be discovered by the next unsuspecting soul. The dense forest stood an old, dilapidated cabin. Legends whispered tales of its cursed history, warning travelers to steer clear. But for a group of thrill-seekers, curiosity outweighed fear. Among them was Sarah, a skeptic who scoffed at superstitions, her boyfriend, Mark, who boasted of his fearlessness, and their adventurous friends, Emily and Jake. Ignoring the warnings, they embarked on a weekend camping trip, determined to uncover the truth behind the cabin's dark reputation. As dusk settled, they arrived at the edge of the woods. Tall trees loomed ominously overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the fading light. Sarah led the way, her flashlight cutting through the darkness like a beacon of defiance against the encroaching night. They found the cabin nestled deep within the forest, its weathered walls standing as a testament to the passage of time. Pushing aside the overgrown foliage, they entered cautiously, the floorboards creaking beneath their weight. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay, and a chill ran down their spines as they surveyed the abandoned belongings strewn about. Despite the eerie atmosphere, Mark scoffed at the notion of ghosts, while Emily nervously clutched Jake's hand. As the night wore on, strange occurrences began to unfold. Shadows danced in the corners of their vision, and faint whispers echoed through the cabin's walls. Sarah dismissed them as tricks of the mind, but unease settled over the group like a shroud. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, they decided to retreat to their tents for the night, but sleep eluded them as the forest came alive with unearthly sounds. Branches scraped against the cabin's walls like skeletal fingers, and the wind carried whispers that seemed to call their names. As dawn broke, they emerged from their tents bleary-eyed and shaken. Mark laughed off their fears, eager to prove their bravery by exploring the woods further. But Sarah's intuition screamed warnings, and Emily's apprehension mirrored her own. Reluctantly, they followed Mark deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around them like silent sentinels. With each step, the whispers grew louder, and shadows flitted through the underbrush like phantoms. Suddenly, they stumbled upon a clearing bathed in eerie moonlight. At its center stood a gnarled tree, its branches twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out for them. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as a sense of dread washed over her. Ignoring her protests, Mark approached the tree with reckless abandon. But as he reached out to touch its bark, a deafening roar split the air, and the ground beneath them trembled violently. A chasm opened at their feet, swallowing Mark whole before sealing shut with an ominous finality. Frozen in terror, Sarah and Emily watched helplessly as Jake frantically searched for his friend. But Mark was gone, swallowed by the forest's insatiable hunger. With trembling hands, they fled the clearing, the whispers of the woods haunting their every step. Weeks passed, but the memory of that fateful night lingered like a curse. Sarah and Emily returned to the cabin one last time, determined to uncover the truth behind its dark secrets. But as they stood before the dilapidated structure, a chill wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of Mark's final screams. To this day, the whispering woods remain shrouded in mystery, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurs, and the spirits of the lost wander in eternal torment. And for those who dare to venture into its depths, the forest whispers its warning: beware the darkness, for it hungers for souls. In the heart of the Appalachian Mountains lies a dense forest known as Whispering Woods. Legend has it that the forest is cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who have perished within its shadows. Skeptics dismiss the tales as mere superstition, but those who have ventured into the woods know better. As dusk settled over the horizon, a group of adventurous teenagers gathered around a crackling campfire at the edge of Whispering Woods. Among them was Sarah, an intrepid soul fascinated by the occult, and her friends Mark, Emily, and Jake. "Come on, Sarah. Tell us a scary story," Mark urged, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Sarah grinned mischievously, knowing just the tale to send shivers down their spines. Legend has it that deep within these woods, there's an old cabin where a hermit once lived. They say he dabbled in dark magic, summoning forces beyond his control. People who've gone looking for the cabin never return. Emily shivered, clutching her jacket tighter around her. That's just a story, right? Sarah shrugged. Who's to say? But if you're brave enough, we could go see for ourselves. The group exchanged hesitant glances, but curiosity got the better of them, and they agreed to explore the woods the next day. The following morning, armed with flashlights and backpacks, the group set out into Whispering Woods. The dense foliage blocked out the sunlight, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent intent. As they ventured deeper, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, and the once lively chatter dwindled to nervous whispers. Sarah led the way, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Hours passed, and just as the sun began to dip below the trees, they stumbled upon an overgrown path leading to a decrepit cabin hidden among the trees. "This must be it," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. The cabin loomed before them, its wooden walls warped with age, and the windows boarded up as if to keep out prying eyes. A sense of foreboding washed over the group, but they pressed on, driven by their insatiable curiosity. Pushing open the creaking door, they entered the cabin's dim interior. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of decay lingered in the air. "This place gives me the creeps," Emily muttered, her voice trembling. Ignoring her apprehension, Sarah ventured further into the cabin, her flashlight illuminating the cobweb-covered furniture and rotting floorboards. In the corner of the room, she spotted a weathered bookshelf, its shelves lined with ancient tomes bound in cracked leather. Curiosity getting the better of her, Sarah reached out and plucked a book from the shelf. Its pages were yellowed with age, and strange symbols adorned its cover. As she flipped through the pages, a sense of unease washed over her. The words were written in a language she couldn't understand, but their meaning seemed to seep into her mind like a whisper in the darkness. Suddenly, the floorboards creaked beneath their feet, and a chill wind swept through the cabin. Panic surged through the group as they realized they were not alone. Without warning, shadows began to dance along the walls, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. Sarah's heart raced as she struggled to make sense of the surreal scene unfolding before her eyes. "We need to get out of here, now," Mark shouted, his voice tinged with fear. But before they could make their escape, a voice echoed through the cabin, cold and malevolent. "Who dares disturb my slumber?" The group froze, their blood running cold as they turned to face the source of the voice. Standing before them was a figure cloaked in darkness, its features obscured by shadow. "We meant no harm," Sarah stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure stepped forward, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. "You have trespassed into my domain, and now you must pay the price." With a wave of its hand, the figure unleashed a wave of dark energy that sent the group sprawling to the ground. Terror consumed them as they realized they were at the mercy of forces beyond their comprehension. In a desperate bid for survival, Sarah reached into her backpack and retrieved a small vial containing a shimmering liquid. "This is our only chance," she whispered, her hands trembling as she uncorked the vial. With a prayer on her lips, Sarah flung the liquid towards the figure, its contents erupting into a blinding light that engulfed the cabin. When the light finally faded, the group found themselves standing outside the cabin, the forest around them eerily silent. The figure was nowhere to be seen, as if it had never been there at all. Breathless and shaken, the group made their way back to camp, their minds reeling from the ordeal they had just endured. As they huddled around the dying embers of their campfire, Sarah knew that they would never forget the horrors of Whispering Woods. And though they had escaped with their lives, she couldn't shake the feeling that something dark and ancient still lurked within the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. In the quiet town of Oakwood, nestled among towering pines and veiled by a perpetual mist, there existed a legend whispered only in hushed tones, a tale of a shadowed realm that lurked beyond the boundaries of perception, waiting to ensnare the unwary. It began with Sarah, a young woman who moved to Oakwood seeking solace from the bustling city life. She found an old, secluded cottage on the outskirts of town, its weathered exterior hinting at secrets long forgotten. Ignoring the warnings of the locals, Sarah settled into her new abode, drawn by its eerie charm. As night descended upon Oakwood, Sarah's cottage seemed to come alive with unsettling whispers that slithered through the darkness. Shadows danced along the walls, their movements fluid and unnatural, as if guided by some unseen force. Unease settled in Sarah's chest, but she brushed it aside, chalking it up to her imagination. One fateful night, a tempest swept through Oakwood, lashing the landscape with torrents of rain and howling winds. Seeking refuge from the storm, Sarah huddled by the fireplace, the flames casting flickering shadows across the room. Suddenly, a chill crept into the air, and the flames dimmed to a feeble glow. From the darkness emerged a figure, its form obscured by a cloak of shadows. Sarah's heart raced as the figure drew closer, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. Paralyzed with fear, she watched as the figure extended a hand, beckoning her into the abyss. Unable to resist its call, Sarah reached out, her fingertips brushing against the icy tendrils of darkness. In an instant, she was engulfed by a whirlwind of shadow, her screams drowned out by the howling winds. And then, silence. When Sarah awoke, she found herself in a realm unlike any she had ever seen. The sky was shrouded in perpetual twilight, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. Strange creatures skittered in the shadows, their eyes gleaming with hunger as they circled her like vultures. Terrified and alone, Sarah wandered through the shadowed realm, searching for a way back to reality. But with each passing moment, she felt herself slipping further into madness, the lines between dream and reality blurring until she could no longer distinguish between the two. Days turned into weeks, and still, Sarah remained trapped in the shadowed realm, her spirit slowly withering away. But just when all hope seemed lost, a faint glimmer of light pierced the darkness, leading her towards a gateway back to Oakwood. With every ounce of strength she had left, Sarah raced towards the light, the shadows clawing at her heels. And then, with a final burst of energy, she stepped through the gateway and collapsed onto the forest floor, gasping for air as the world spun around her. As dawn broke over Oakwood, Sarah stumbled back to her cottage, her body battered and bruised, but her spirit unbroken. Though she had escaped the shadowed realm, its memory would haunt her for the rest of her days, a reminder of the thin veil that separates the world of the living from the realm of darkness. From that day forth, Sarah lived with the knowledge that the shadowed realm was not just a legend, but a tangible threat lurking just beyond the edges of perception, waiting to ensnare those who dared to venture too close. And as night fell over Oakwood, she would lock her doors and windows, knowing that the shadows were always watching, always waiting. This is our story today. In the heart of the countryside stood Blackwood Manor, a grand estate veiled in mystery and whispered tales of the supernatural. Its towering facade loomed ominously against the backdrop of the moonlit sky, casting elongated shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent intent. For decades, locals spoke in hushed tones of the eerie occurrences that plagued the sprawling estate, warning outsiders to steer clear of its cursed grounds. The tale of Blackwood Manor began with the enigmatic disappearance of its original owners, the Blackwood family, under mysterious circumstances that left the community bewildered and fearful. Rumors swirled of dark rituals and unholy pacts, shrouding the manor in a cloak of dread that seemed to seep into the very earth upon which it stood. Years passed, and the once grand estate fell into a state of disrepair, its once pristine halls now overrun by nature's relentless grasp. Despite the warnings and the palpable aura of menace that surrounded Blackwood Manor, it inevitably drew the attention of those brave or foolish enough to seek out its secrets. Among the curious souls was a group of intrepid urban explorers, determined to unravel the mysteries that lay hidden within the decaying walls of the forsaken estate. Ignoring the warnings of locals and brushing aside the superstitions that clung to Blackwood Manor like a shroud, they ventured forth under the cloak of night, their flashlights cutting through the thick veil of darkness that enveloped the sprawling grounds. As they stepped foot into the dilapidated foyer, a chill swept through the air, sending shivers cascading down their spines. The oppressive silence that greeted them was broken only by the creaking of floorboards beneath their feet, each step echoing like a solemn dirge in the stillness of the night. Their exploration led them deeper into the labyrinthine corridors of the manor, where the walls seemed to whisper ancient secrets and the shadows writhed with unseen malevolence. Yet, fueled by a combination of curiosity and bravado, they pressed on, their resolve unyielding in the face of the unknown. It was not long before they encountered signs of the manor's sinister past. Strange symbols adorned the walls, their meaning lost to time but imbued with a sense of dread that sent shivers down their spines. As they delved deeper, they stumbled upon a hidden chamber concealed behind a tapestry, its entrance obscured by layers of dust and decay. With trembling hands, they pushed aside the heavy fabric and stepped into the chamber beyond, their hearts pounding in anticipation of what they might uncover. What they found within would haunt them for the rest of their days. The chamber was a macabre tableau frozen in time, its walls adorned with grotesque relics of a bygone era. Skulls grinned from atop makeshift altars, their empty sockets seeming to bore into the very souls of those who dared to gaze upon them. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and a sense of impending doom hung heavy in the stagnant air. As they stood transfixed by the horror that surrounded them, a cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing their flickering flashlights and plunging them into darkness. Panic seized their hearts as they groped blindly in the blackness, their screams echoing through the void as they became ensnared in the grip of an unseen terror. In the darkness, they felt a presence looming over them, its malevolence palpable even in the absence of light. Whispers filled their ears, taunting and mocking, as icy fingers traced invisible patterns upon their flesh. Desperate and terrified, they fled deeper into the bowels of the manor, their only thought to escape the horrors that pursued them. But there was no escape from the nightmare that had engulfed them, for Blackwood Manor was not merely haunted by the restless spirits of the past, it was a prison from which there could be no reprieve. As the echoes of their screams faded into the darkness, swallowed by the endless expanse of the forsaken estate, the true horror of Blackwood Manor remained hidden, waiting patiently for its next unsuspecting victims to wander into its grasp. In the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, there lies a forest untouched by time. Locals know it as the Whispering Woods, a place where trees seem to murmur secrets to those who dare to wander within. Legends speak of the spirits that dwell within its depths, warning travelers to steer clear after dark. But for one group of friends, curiosity outweighed caution. It was a crisp autumn evening when Emma, Alex, Sarah, and Matt decided to venture into the Whispering Woods. Armed with flashlights and a sense of adventure, they pushed through the underbrush, their laughter echoing through the trees. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the forest floor, they pressed on deeper into the darkness. The air grew colder, and the once vibrant foliage took on a sinister hue. Branches twisted like gnarled fingers reaching out to grab them, and the ground seemed to shift beneath their feet. But still, they continued, fueled by a desire to uncover the secrets hidden within. As they trudged onward, Emma noticed a faint whispering sound drifting through the trees. At first, she dismissed it as the wind rustling the leaves, but as they delved deeper into the woods, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. It was as though the forest itself was trying to communicate with them, its voice both haunting and seductive. Unease crept into the group as the whispers intensified, their words indiscernible yet undeniably malevolent. Matt suggested they turn back, but Sarah scoffed, dismissing his fears as childish. Determined to prove her bravery, she forged ahead, the others reluctantly following suit. Hours passed, and exhaustion began to weigh heavily on the group. Their flashlights flickered, casting long shadows that danced ominously among the trees. Just when they were on the verge of giving up hope, they stumbled upon a clearing unlike any they had seen before. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows shattered and roof caved in. Vines snaked their way up the walls, and the air around it seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. Despite the warning signs, curiosity got the better of them, and they cautiously approached the abandoned structure. As they stepped inside, a wave of musty air washed over them, accompanied by a chorus of whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Sarah shivered, her bravado fading in the face of such palpable dread. But before they could retreat, a figure emerged from the shadows, its form twisted and contorted in unnatural angles. Panic set in as they realized they were not alone. With nowhere to run, they stood frozen in terror as the figure drew closer, its whispers growing louder with each agonizing step. In a last-ditch effort to escape, they bolted for the door, only to find it sealed shut, trapping them inside with the malevolent presence. Desperate, they huddled together in the corner as the whispers engulfed them, their words twisting into a cacophony of madness. Time seemed to stand still as they awaited their inevitable fate, the darkness consuming them whole. When dawn finally broke, rescuers found no trace of the group save for their abandoned belongings scattered among the trees. The Whispering Woods had claimed yet another victim, its secrets buried deep within its ancient roots, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander into its grasp. Detective Adamson had seen his fair share of horrors in his career, but nothing quite prepared him for the case of the Willow Street haunting. It began innocently enough, with a call to investigate a disturbance at an old Victorian house on the quiet Willow Street. Little did he know, it would lead him down a path of terror he could never have imagined. The house stood at the end of the street, its once grand facade now weathered and worn. Detective Adamson and his partner, Officer Ramirez, approached cautiously, flashlights in hand. As they stepped onto the creaking porch, a chill ran down Adamson's spine. Something felt off about this place. Entering the house, they were greeted by an eerie silence broken only by the sound of their own footsteps. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of decay hung heavy in the stale atmosphere. They began their search, moving from room to room, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like knives. In the living room, they found old furniture draped in dusty sheets, as if frozen in time. Ramirez shuddered as he pulled back one of the sheets, revealing a cracked portrait of a stern-looking man. "Creepy," he muttered, but Adamson brushed it off, his focus on the task at hand. As they ascended the staircase, the air grew colder, and the feeling of dread intensified. Adamson's instincts told him they were getting closer to the source of the disturbance. They reached the top of the stairs and entered a long hallway lined with closed doors. They tried each door in turn, finding nothing but empty rooms until they reached the last one at the end of the hall. As Adamson turned the handle, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut with a deafening bang. Ramirez jumped back, his heart pounding in his chest. Adamson pushed the door open slowly, revealing a room engulfed in darkness. He stepped inside, his flashlight illuminating the scene before them. The room was bare except for a single chair in the center, facing away from them. Ramirez hesitated, a sense of unease washing over him. "Maybe we should call for backup," he suggested, but Adamson shook his head. He had to know what was causing the disturbance, no matter the cost. They approached the chair cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Adamson reached out and turned the chair around, his blood running cold at the sight before him. Sitting in the chair was a lifeless figure, its eyes staring blankly ahead. But it wasn't just any figure, it was a perfect replica of Detective Adamson himself. A chill ran down Adamson's spine as he stumbled back in horror. Ramirez's voice broke through the silence, his words barely audible over the pounding of Adamson's heart. "What the hell is going on?" Before Adamson could respond, the room began to shake violently, as if caught in the grip of an unseen force. Books flew off shelves, furniture toppled over, and the walls seemed to groan in agony. Ramirez screamed, his voice lost in the chaos. Suddenly, everything went still. Adamson and Ramirez found themselves standing alone in the room, the lifeless figure gone without a trace. They exchanged a terrified glance, both knowing they had just witnessed something beyond comprehension. They fled the house, their minds reeling with fear and confusion. Adamson knew they would never be able to explain what they had seen, but one thing was certain, Willow Street held secrets far darker than they could have ever imagined. As they drove away from the house, Adamson couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of the true horror that lurked within its walls. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the deserted street, he couldn't help but wonder what other nightmares lay waiting to be uncovered in the darkness. The urban legends surrounding the old dormitory on the outskirts of campus had always piqued Amelia's curiosity. Despite the warnings from her fellow students, she decided to move into room 314, rumored to be the most haunted room in the building. Little did she know, she was about to experience a terror beyond her wildest nightmares. As the semester began, strange occurrences plagued Amelia's nights. It started with subtle noises, a faint whisper in the darkness, the creaking of floorboards outside her door. She dismissed them as the typical sounds of an old building, but soon they grew more ominous. One night, as Amelia lay in bed studying, she felt a cold draft sweep through the room, chilling her to the bone. She glanced up from her books to see her breath hanging in the air, a visible cloud of mist in the moonlight. She reached for her phone to call a friend, but the battery was inexplicably dead. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness, the only source of light the eerie glow of the full moon seeping through her window. Panic gripped her as she fumbled for the light switch, but no matter how many times she flicked it, the lights remained off. Terrified, Amelia huddled under her blankets, praying for morning to come. But as the hours passed, a sense of dread settled over her like a suffocating blanket. She felt as though she was being watched, the weight of unseen eyes bearing down on her from the shadows. Just as she began to drift into an uneasy sleep, she was jolted awake by the sound of scratching coming from the corner of the room. She strained her eyes in the darkness, trying to make out the source of the noise, but saw nothing. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, until it sounded as though something, or someone, was trying to claw its way out of the walls. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away, her mind racing with fear. In a desperate attempt to escape the nightmare unfolding around her, she dashed for the door, flinging it open and fleeing into the hallway. But to her horror, she found herself standing in the same dimly lit corridor she had just left behind. Panic rising, she ran down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the empty silence. But no matter how far she ran, she couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped in a never-ending maze of darkness. Exhausted and disoriented, she collapsed to the floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. And that's when she heard it, the sound of footsteps approaching from the darkness. Frozen with fear, she watched as a figure emerged from the shadows, its features obscured by the dim light. It reached out a hand towards her, its touch sending a chill down her spine. "Amelia," it whispered, its voice a haunting echo in the silence. "You cannot escape." With a scream, Amelia jolted awake in her bed, drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. It was morning, the sunlight streaming through her window casting the room in a warm glow. Shaken but relieved, she tried to convince herself it had all been a terrible nightmare. But as she glanced at the corner of the room, she saw them, the faint scratches etched into the wall, a chilling reminder of the horrors she had witnessed. From that day on, Amelia never felt truly alone in room 314. She could sense a presence lingering in the shadows, watching, waiting. And though she tried to convince herself it was all in her imagination, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was not the only one haunting the halls of the old. Deep within the heart of the Whispering Woods lies a secret so sinister, it has haunted the residents of Willow Creek for generations. As dusk settles over the small town, whispers fill the air, carrying tales of terror and tragedy. One chilly October evening, a group of friends decided to venture into the woods, drawn by the allure of the unknown. Among them was Sarah, a skeptical but adventurous young woman with a fascination for the supernatural. Little did she know, she was about to uncover a horror beyond her wildest nightmares. The forest was alive with the sound of rustling leaves and snapping twigs as they ventured deeper into the darkness. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she followed the narrow path, her flashlight cutting through the shadows like a beacon of hope. As they trudged deeper into the woods, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, a tangible sense of unease settling over the group. Sarah brushed it off, chalking it up to her overactive imagination, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Suddenly, they stumbled upon a clearing bathed in moonlight, the trees parting to reveal an ancient graveyard hidden within the forest depths. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she gazed upon the weathered tombstones, their inscriptions faded with age. Against her better judgment, Sarah felt drawn to the graveyard, as if an invisible force was pulling her towards the darkness. With a trembling hand, she reached out to touch one of the tombstones, her fingers grazing the cold stone surface. That's when she heard it, the faint sound of whispering echoing through the night air. At first, she dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on her mind, but as the whispers grew louder, she realized they were coming from the graves themselves. Terrified, Sarah turned to flee, but a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, engulfing her in a whirlwind of leaves and debris. She stumbled and fell to the ground, the whispers growing louder with each passing second. As she lay there, paralyzed with fear, the ground beneath her began to tremble, as if something was stirring beneath the surface. With a deafening roar, the earth split open, revealing a gaping chasm that seemed to descend into the very depths of hell. Sarah's friends screamed in horror as she was swallowed by the darkness, her cries lost in the cacophony of the forest. They watched helplessly as the chasm closed in on itself, leaving behind nothing but an eerie silence. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's disappearance remained a mystery that haunted the town of Willow Creek. Some whispered of foul play, while others spoke of supernatural forces at work in the Whispering Woods, but Sarah's friends knew the truth. They had witnessed the horrors that lurked within the forest depths, and they would never forget the terror of that fateful night. And as the whispers continued to echo through the darkness, they knew they could never escape the haunting truth of the Whispering Woods. In the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, nestled amidst a dense forest, there stood a forgotten cabin shrouded in mystery. Its weathered walls bore the scars of time, and the surrounding woods seemed to whisper tales of long-forgotten horrors. Few dared to venture near, but curiosity led a group of friends to unlock the secrets hidden within its decaying walls. Among them was Emily, a thrill-seeker with a fascination for the supernatural. Despite the warnings from locals, she convinced her friends to join her on an expedition to explore the cabin's dark past. Little did they know, they were about to uncover a terror beyond their wildest nightmares. As they trekked deeper into the woods, the trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. The air was thick with the scent of pine and decay, and a sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air. After hours of hiking, they stumbled upon the cabin, its skeletal frame barely visible through the tangle of undergrowth. Excitement mingled with apprehension as they approached, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The door creaked open with a mournful groan, revealing a dimly lit interior cloaked in shadows. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling, and dust danced in the air like spectral wisps. Emily's heart raced with anticipation as she stepped inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The cabin was frozen in time, its furnishings untouched for decades. Old photographs adorned the walls, their faces staring back with hollow eyes. But it was the basement that held the true horrors of the cabin's past. With trepidation, they descended into the darkness below, the air growing colder with each step. The basement was musty and oppressive, the sound of dripping water echoing off the walls. As they explored further, they stumbled upon a series of crude drawings etched into the stone floor, a chilling depiction of ritualistic symbols and arcane sigils. Emily's blood ran cold as she realized they had stumbled upon something far more sinister than they could have imagined. Suddenly, a sense of dread washed over them as they heard the sound of footsteps echoing from the darkness. Panic set in as they realized they were not alone in the cabin, the spirits of its tormented past still lingered within its walls. With a sense of urgency, they raced to leave the cabin, their hearts pounding in their chests. But as they reached the door, they found it inexplicably sealed shut, trapping them inside with the malevolent force that lurked within. Desperate for escape, they searched frantically for another way out, but the windows were barred shut, and the walls seemed to close in around them. The air grew thick with the stench of decay. And the sound of whispers filled the room like a cacophony of tortured souls. With nowhere left to run, they huddled together in terror as the darkness enveloped them. Shadows danced on the walls, their forms twisted and contorted into grotesque shapes. Emily's screams echoed through the cabin as the spirits closed in, their icy touch sending shivers down her spine. Just as all hope seemed lost, a blinding light filled the room, banishing the darkness and freeing them from the cabin's grasp. They stumbled out into the daylight, shaken but alive, their minds reeling from the horrors they had witnessed. As they made their way back through the forest, they vowed never to return to the forgotten cabin. But as they glanced back one last time, they knew that its dark secrets would haunt them forever, a reminder of the true terror that lurked within the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains. In the heart of the city, amidst the hustle and bustle of everyday life, there stood a nondescript building known only as the Midnight Library. Its unassuming facade belied the secrets hidden within its walls, drawing in those seeking knowledge of the occult and the supernatural. Among them was Marcus, a young man with a thirst for forbidden knowledge, whose journey into the depths of the Midnight Library would lead him down a path of terror and despair. It was a cold and rainy night when Marcus first stumbled upon the Midnight Library. The streets were deserted, the only sound the patter of rain against the pavement. Intrigued by the flickering neon sign that read, "Open all night," he pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of old books and dust, and the dimly lit interior seemed to stretch on for eternity. Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine as he gazed upon rows of ancient tomes lining the shelves, their leather-bound covers adorned with cryptic symbols and sigils. A hunched figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. "Welcome to the Midnight Library," it rasped, its voice echoing through the silence. "How may I assist you on this dark and stormy night?" Marcus hesitated for a moment, his curiosity warring with his sense of unease. But the lure of forbidden knowledge was too strong to resist, and he soon found himself drawn deeper into the library's depths. The hunched figure led Marcus to a secluded corner of the library, where a dusty tome lay open on a wooden lectern. The pages were yellowed with age, and the ink had faded to a ghostly gray, but the words seemed to pulsate with a life of their own. "This book contains the secrets of the occult," the figure said, its voice barely more than a whisper. "But be warned, knowledge comes at a price." Undeterred, Marcus eagerly flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the arcane symbols and incantations. He had always been fascinated by the supernatural, but nothing could have prepared him for the horrors that lay within the pages of the Midnight Library. As the hours passed, Marcus lost himself in the forbidden knowledge, unaware of the darkness closing in around him. Shadows danced on the walls, their forms twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. The air grew heavy with the stench of decay, and Marcus felt a sense of dread settle over him like a suffocating blanket. Suddenly, he was jolted out of his trance by a blood-curdling scream echoing through the library. Panic surged through him as he realized he was not alone, something sinister lurked within the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. With a sense of urgency, Marcus slammed shut the book and fled from the library, his heart pounding in his chest. But no matter how fast he ran, the darkness followed close behind, its icy grip tightening with each passing moment. As he burst out into the rain-soaked streets, Marcus glanced back at the Midnight Library one last time, its windows glowing with an otherworldly light. He knew he had narrowly escaped the horrors that lurked within, but the memory of that fateful night would haunt him forever. From that day on, Marcus vowed never to seek knowledge of the occult again. But as he lay awake at night, tormented by nightmares of the Midnight Library, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had awakened within him, a darkness that threatened to consume his very soul. In the heart of the mist-shrouded forests stood Willow Creek Manor, an imposing structure with a history shrouded in mystery and tragedy. It was said that the manor held dark secrets within its walls, secrets that whispered through the shadows and echoed down the corridors. Few dared to venture near it, and those who did often spoke of an inexplicable sense of dread that gripped them as they approached. Legend had it that the manor was cursed by the restless spirits of those who had perished within its confines. The most infamous tale was that of the Willow Creek family, who had once owned the estate. One fateful night, they were said to have been brutally murdered by an unknown assailant, their screams echoing through the halls before falling silent forever. Despite the warnings and the rumors, a group of thrill-seekers decided to spend the night at Willow Creek Manor, eager to uncover the truth behind the stories that had haunted the town for generations. Among them were Sarah, a skeptic who scoffed at the idea of ghosts, and Mark, a believer who was convinced that the spirits of the past still roamed the halls. As they entered the manor, a chill wind seemed to whisper through the trees, sending shivers down their spines. The interior of the manor was as ominous as its exterior, with cobwebs clinging to the walls and a faint scent of decay hanging in the air. They explored the manor, their footsteps echoing through the empty rooms as they searched for any sign of the supernatural. But as the hours passed, they found nothing, and Sarah began to mock Mark for his belief in ghosts. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the darkness, causing them all to jump in fright. Racing towards the source of the sound, they found themselves in a dimly lit room, its walls adorned with faded portraits of the Willow Creek family. As they searched for the cause of the noise, they were startled by the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the room. Frozen in fear, they watched as the portraits seemed to come to life, the eyes of the figures within following their every move. With a scream, Sarah turned to flee, but the door slammed shut before her, trapping them all inside. Panic surged through the group as they desperately tried to escape, but the windows were barred, and the doors refused to budge. In the flickering candlelight, they saw them, the spirits of the Willow Creek family, their faces twisted in agony as they reached out towards them. The air grew thick with the stench of death as the ghosts surrounded them, their mournful wails echoing through the room. As the night wore on, the group huddled together in terror, praying for morning to come and release them from the nightmare that had consumed them. But as the first light of dawn crept through the windows, they knew that they would never escape the horrors of Willow Creek Manor. To this day, the manor stands as a grim reminder of the darkness that lurks within us all, its walls forever haunted by the spirits of the past. And though many have tried to unravel its mysteries, none have ever returned to tell the tale. In the heart of the mist-shrouded woods stood Blackwood Manor, a grand estate with a history stained by tragedy. For generations, tales whispered of strange occurrences within its walls, of eerie apparitions and inexplicable sounds that sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to approach. Among the locals, it was said that the spirits of the past residents lingered, trapped in a realm between the living and the dead. One fateful night, a group of thrill-seekers, drawn by the allure of the supernatural, decided to spend the evening in the abandoned manor. They were a diverse group, united by their fascination with the macabre and their desire to uncover the truth behind the legends. As they ventured into the darkness, their flashlights casting long shadows against the decaying walls, a sense of unease settled over them. The air was thick with anticipation, every creak and groan of the old house echoing through the halls like a warning from beyond the grave. They explored room after room, each one seemingly frozen in time, filled with antique furniture and faded portraits staring down with hollow eyes. But as they delved deeper into the labyrinthine corridors, they began to feel as though they were being watched, a sensation that sent chills racing down their spines. It was in the dimly lit parlor that they first encountered the presence that dwelled within Blackwood Manor. A flickering candle cast dancing shadows across the walls as they gathered around a dusty Ouija board, their fingers trembling with anticipation. At first, the planchette moved slowly, spelling out cryptic messages that sent shivers down their spines. But as the night wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, and the messages became more sinister, as if the spirits were growing stronger with each passing moment. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candle and plunging them into darkness. Panic gripped the group as they fumbled for their flashlights, their hearts pounding in their chests. In the inky blackness, they heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the halls, slow and deliberate, as if whatever lurked in the shadows was drawing closer with each passing moment. With trembling hands, they fumbled for the door, desperate to escape the malevolent presence that lurked within Blackwood Manor. But as they reached for the handle, they found it wouldn't budge, as if some unseen force was holding it shut. Panic turned to terror as they realized they were trapped, at the mercy of whatever dark force inhabited the house. With nowhere left to run, they huddled together in the darkness, praying for morning to come and release them from their nightmare. But as the hours dragged on, their hope began to fade, replaced by a bone-chilling certainty that they would never leave Blackwood Manor alive. Just as they were about to succumb to despair, a faint glimmer of light appeared on the horizon, casting a pale glow through the windows of the old house. With a final burst of strength, they threw themselves against the door, breaking free from its grip and stumbling out into the dawn. As they fled into the safety of the surrounding woods, they dared not look back, for fear of what horrors still lurked within the shadows of Blackwood Manor. To this day, the events of that night remain shrouded in mystery. A cautionary tale whispered among the locals as a reminder of the dangers that lie hidden in the darkness, waiting to claim those foolish enough to seek them out. In the heart of the city, amidst the hustle and bustle of everyday life, there stood a nondescript building known only as the Midnight Library. Its unassuming facade belied the secrets hidden within its walls, drawing in those seeking knowledge of the occult and the supernatural. Among them was Marcus, a young man with a thirst for forbidden knowledge, whose journey into the depths of the Midnight Library would lead him down a path of terror and despair. It was a cold and rainy night when Marcus first stumbled upon the Midnight Library. The streets were deserted, the only sound the patter of rain against the pavement. Intrigued by the flickering neon sign that read, "Open all night," he pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of old books and dust, and the dimly lit interior seemed to stretch on for eternity. Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine as he gazed upon rows of ancient tomes lining the shelves, their leather-bound covers adorned with cryptic symbols and sigils. A hunched figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. "Welcome to the Midnight Library," it rasped, its voice echoing through the silence. "How may I assist you on this dark and stormy night?" Marcus hesitated for a moment, his curiosity warring with his sense of unease. But the lure of forbidden knowledge was too strong to resist, and he soon found himself drawn deeper into the library's depths. The hunched figure led Marcus to a secluded corner of the library, where a dusty tome lay open on a wooden lectern. The pages were yellowed with age, and the ink had faded to a ghostly gray, but the words seemed to pulsate with a life of their own. "This book contains the secrets of the occult," the figure said, its voice barely more than a whisper. "But be warned, knowledge comes at a price." Undeterred, Marcus eagerly flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the arcane symbols and incantations. He had always been fascinated by the supernatural, but nothing could have prepared him for the horrors that lay within the pages of the Midnight Library. As the hours passed, Marcus lost himself in the forbidden knowledge, unaware of the darkness closing in around him. Shadows danced on the walls, their forms twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. The air grew heavy with the stench of decay, and Marcus felt a sense of dread settle over him like a suffocating blanket. Suddenly, he was jolted out of his trance by a blood-curdling scream echoing through the library. Panic surged through him as he realized he was not alone. Something sinister lurked within the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. With a sense of urgency, Marcus slammed shut the book and fled from the library, his heart pounding in his chest. But no matter how fast he ran, the darkness followed close behind, its icy grip tightening with each passing moment. As he burst out into the rain-soaked streets, Marcus glanced back at the Midnight Library one last time, its windows glowing with an otherworldly light. He knew he had narrowly escaped the horrors that lurked within, but the memory of that fateful night would haunt him forever. From that day on, Marcus vowed never to seek knowledge of the occult again. But as he lay awake at night, tormented by nightmares of the Midnight Library, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had awakened within him, a darkness that threatened to consume his very soul. Crowded forests stood Willow Creek Manor, an imposing structure with a history shrouded in mystery and tragedy. It was said that the manor held dark secrets within its walls, secrets that whispered through the shadows and echoed down the corridors. Few dared to venture near it, and those who did often spoke of an inexplicable sense of dread that gripped them as they approached. Legend had it that the manor was cursed by the restless spirits of those who had perished within its confines. The most infamous tale was that of the Willow Creek family, who had once owned the estate. One fateful night, they were said to have been brutally murdered by an unknown assailant, their screams echoing through the halls before falling silent forever. Despite the warnings and the rumors, a group of thrill-seekers decided to spend the night at Willow Creek Manor, eager to uncover the truth behind the stories that had haunted the town for generations. Among them were Sarah, a skeptic who scoffed at the idea of ghosts, and Mark, a believer who was convinced that the spirits of the past still roamed the halls. As they entered the manor, a chill wind seemed to whisper through the trees, sending shivers down their spines. The interior of the manor was as ominous as its exterior, with cobwebs clinging to the walls and the faint scent of decay hanging in the air. They explored the manor, their footsteps echoing through the empty rooms as they searched for any sign of the supernatural. But as the hours passed, they found nothing, and Sarah began to mock Mark for his belief in ghosts. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the darkness, causing them all to jump in fright. Racing towards the source of the sound, they found themselves in a dimly lit room, its walls adorned with faded portraits of the Willow Creek family. As they searched for the cause of the noise, they were startled by the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the room. Frozen in fear, they watched as the portraits seemed to come to life, the eyes of the figures within following their every move. With a scream, Sarah turned to flee, but the door slammed shut before her, trapping them all inside. Panic surged through the group as they desperately tried to escape, but the windows were barred, and the doors refused to budge. In the flickering candlelight, they saw them, the spirits of the Willow Creek family, their faces twisted in agony as they reached out towards them. The air grew thick with the stench of death as the ghosts surrounded them, their mournful wails echoing through the room. As the night wore on, the group huddled together in terror, praying for morning to come and release them from the nightmare that had consumed them. But as the first light of dawn crept through the windows, they knew that they would never escape the horrors of Willow Creek Manor. To this day, the manor stands as a grim reminder of the darkness that lurks within us all, its walls forever haunted by the spirits of the past. And though many have tried to unravel its mysteries, none have ever returned to tell the tale. Blackwood Manor, a grand estate with a history stained by tragedy. For generations, tales whispered of strange occurrences within its walls, of eerie apparitions and inexplicable sounds that sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to approach. Among the locals, it was said that the spirits of the past residents lingered, trapped in a realm between the living and the dead. One fateful night, a group of thrill-seekers, drawn by the allure of the supernatural, decided to spend the evening in the abandoned manor. They were a diverse group, united by their fascination with the macabre and their desire to uncover the truth behind the legends. As they ventured into the darkness, their flashlights casting long shadows against the decaying walls, a sense of unease settled over them. The air was thick with anticipation, every creak and groan of the old house echoing through the halls like a warning from beyond the grave. They explored room after room, each one seemingly frozen in time, filled with antique furniture and faded portraits staring down with hollow eyes. But as they delved deeper into the labyrinthine corridors, they began to feel as though they were being watched, a sensation that sent chills racing down their spines. It was in the dimly lit parlor that they first encountered the presence that dwelled within Blackwood Manor. A flickering candle cast dancing shadows across the walls as they gathered around a dusty Ouija board, their fingers trembling with anticipation. At first, the planchette moved slowly, spelling out cryptic messages that sent shivers down their spines. But as the night wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, and the messages became more sinister, as if the spirits were growing stronger with each passing moment. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candle and plunging them into darkness. Panic gripped the group as they fumbled for their flashlights, their hearts pounding in their chests. In the inky blackness, they heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the halls, slow and deliberate, as if whatever lurked in the shadows was drawing closer with each passing moment. With trembling hands, they fumbled for the door, desperate to escape the malevolent presence that lurked within Blackwood Manor. But as they reached for the handle, they found it wouldn't budge, as if some unseen force was holding it shut. Panic turned to terror as they realized they were trapped, at the mercy of whatever dark force inhabited the house. With nowhere left to run, they huddled together in the darkness, praying for morning to come and release them from their nightmare. But as the hours dragged on, their hope began to fade, replaced by a bone-chilling certainty that they would never leave Blackwood Manor alive. Just as they were about to succumb to despair, a faint glimmer of light appeared on the horizon, casting a pale glow through the windows of the old house. With a final burst of strength, they threw themselves against the door, breaking free from its grip and stumbling out into the dawn. As they fled into the safety of the surrounding woods, they dared not look back, for fear of what horrors still lurked within the shadows of Blackwood Manor. To this day, the events of that night remain shrouded in mystery, a cautionary tale whispered among the locals as a reminder of the dangers that lie hidden in the darkness, waiting to claim those foolish enough to seek them out. As I scrolled through my Instagram feed late one night, I stumbled upon a post that caught my attention, a hauntingly beautiful selfie. The photo was posted by a user I didn't recognize, but there was something unsettlingly familiar about the face staring back at me. The caption read, "Caught a glimpse of something in the background, can you see it?" Intrigued, I zoomed in on the image, but at first, I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Just the dimly lit room and the mysterious figure posing in front of the camera. Then, I saw it, a shadowy silhouette lurking in the corner, barely visible but undeniably there. Feeling a chill run down my spine, I quickly double-tapped the photo and continued scrolling. But the image lingered in my mind, haunting me with its eerie presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this picture than met the eye. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadowy figure from the selfie, looming in the darkness of my mind. Eventually, exhaustion took hold, and I drifted into a fitful sleep. The next morning, I woke up to find a new post from the same user, a close-up of their face, with a cryptic message in the caption, "They're getting closer." Panic gnawed at my insides as I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Was this some elaborate prank? Or was there something truly sinister going on? Unable to resist the urge to investigate further, I clicked on the user's profile, hoping to find some answers. But the more I scrolled through their feed, the more unsettled I became. Each post seemed to tell a story of its own, a story of fear, paranoia, and the unknown. I reached out to some friends, hoping they could offer some reassurance, but their responses only added to my growing sense of dread. None of them had ever heard of the user, and some even claimed that the profile didn't exist when they tried to look for it. Desperate for answers, I returned to the original selfie, studying it intently for any clues. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a reflection in the mirror behind the figure. But instead of my own reflection, I saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me, filled with malice and hunger. Terror gripped me as I realized that whatever was in that photo wasn't just a figment of my imagination, it was real, and it was coming for me. Frantic, I tried to delete the photo, but every time I clicked the button, it reappeared as if mocking my feeble attempts to escape its grasp. And with each failed attempt, I could feel the presence growing stronger, drawing closer with every passing moment. In a last-ditch effort to save myself, I reached out to a friend who was well-versed in the occult, hoping they could provide some insight into what was happening. But when they arrived at my apartment, they found me huddled in a corner, gibbering incoherently as the shadows closed in around me. To this day, no one knows what became of me or the haunted selfie that brought about my demise. Some say I was consumed by the darkness that lurked within the photo, while others believe I simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the digital realm. But one thing is for certain, the next time you scroll through your Instagram feed late at night, think twice before you double-tap that selfie. You never know what horrors might be lurking in the background, waiting to claim their next unsuspecting victim. This is our story. In the heart of a small, sleepy town nestled between rolling hills, there stood a McDonald's. It was an unassuming place, with golden arches that seemed to smile down upon the passing cars. But within its walls lurked a darkness that few could comprehend. It was a chilly autumn evening when Sarah, a college student, pulled into the drive-thru. She was craving a late-night snack after a long study session. The Golden M beckoned her like a siren, promising comfort in the form of greasy fries and a warm burger. Little did she know, she was about to embark on a journey into the depths of terror. As Sarah approached the speaker to place her order, a crackling voice greeted her, sending shivers down her spine. She brushed it off as a malfunction and placed her order, but when she pulled up to the window, she was met with an eerie silence. The drive-thru attendant's eyes were empty voids, staring at her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She quickly paid and sped away, eager to escape the unsettling atmosphere. But as she unwrapped her burger, she noticed something strange. The meat was pulsating, as if it were still alive. Disgusted, she tossed it out the window and vowed never to return to that cursed McDonald's. However, as the days passed, Sarah found herself drawn back to the fast food restaurant against her will. Each time she approached the drive-thru, the voice grew louder, more insistent, commanding her to return. She tried to resist, but it was as if an unseen force compelled her to obey. One fateful night, Sarah found herself standing before the McDonald's once again, trembling with fear. The drive-thru attendant's eyes bore into her soul, piercing her with an otherworldly gaze. She knew then that she was trapped, ensnared in a web of darkness from which there was no escape. As she drove away, a sense of dread washed over her. She could feel eyes watching her from the shadows, lurking just out of sight. And then, without warning, her car stalled, leaving her stranded on the deserted road. Panicked, Sarah tried to restart the engine, but it was no use. She was alone, vulnerable to whatever malevolent force had taken hold of her. And then, from the darkness emerged a figure, cloaked in shadow, its eyes burning with unholy fire. With a blood-curdling scream, Sarah realized the true horror of the McDonald's. It was not merely a restaurant, but a gateway to hell itself, where unsuspecting souls were lured to their doom. And now, she was its next victim. In the days that followed, Sarah's disappearance sent shockwaves through the town. Some whispered of a curse that had befallen the McDonald's, while others dismissed it as mere superstition. But one thing was certain, the golden arches held secrets far darker than anyone could imagine. And as the sun set on the small town, casting long shadows across the empty streets, the McDonald's stood silent and foreboding, its doors open to all who dared to enter. But beware, for once you step inside, you may never escape the clutches of the grim drive-thru. In the heart of a small, forgotten town, there stood an old mansion, shrouded in mystery and whispers of the past. Its windows were like vacant eyes, staring out into the world with a haunting emptiness. The townsfolk spoke of the mansion in hushed tones, warning curious souls to stay away, for it held secrets that were better left undisturbed. One stormy night, a group of adventurous teenagers decided to defy the warnings and explore the abandoned mansion. Armed with nothing but flashlights and nervous laughter, they pushed open the creaking doors and stepped into the darkness within. The air inside was heavy with dust and decay, and the sound of their footsteps echoed through the empty halls. As they ventured deeper into the mansion, they stumbled upon a door that seemed to beckon to them, its wood warped and weathered with age. Against their better judgment, they pushed open the door and found themselves in a room unlike any other they had seen. The walls were adorned with faded wallpaper, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. But what caught their attention was the eerie collection of objects scattered around the room. There were antique dolls with cracked porcelain faces, their empty eyes seeming to follow the intruders as they moved. Rusty knives lay next to tarnished mirrors, and yellowed photographs lined the walls, their subjects staring out with frozen smiles. Uneasy but intrigued, the teenagers began to explore the room, their flashlights casting long shadows that danced across the walls. But as they delved deeper into the darkness, they soon realized that they were not alone. A cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing their flashlights one by one until they were left in utter darkness. Panic seized them as they fumbled for their phones, the feeble glow providing little comfort in the suffocating blackness. And then they heard it, a soft whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. It spoke of forgotten sins and restless spirits, of lives lost and souls trapped in eternal torment. Terror gripped the teenagers as they huddled together, praying for dawn to break and release them from this nightmare. But as the hours passed and the whispers grew louder, they realized that escape was impossible. For in their foolishness, they had stumbled upon something far more sinister than they could have ever imagined. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the teenagers were found huddled together in the forgotten room, their faces frozen in expressions of pure terror. And though the mansion was eventually torn down and the land upon which it stood reclaimed by nature, the memory of that fateful night lingered on, a warning to all who dared to venture where they did not belong. Deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains lies a dense forest known as Whispering Woods. Legend has it that those who enter never return the same, if they return at all. In the summer of 1998, a group of friends decided to embark on a camping trip in Whispering Woods. Among them were Sarah, the adventurous leader of the group, Mark, her skeptical but loyal best friend, Emily, the bookish one with a penchant for the supernatural, and Jake, the daredevil always seeking his next thrill. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the air grew thick with an eerie silence. The trees seemed to lean in, whispering secrets that sent shivers down their spines. Despite their unease, they pressed on, eager to find the perfect camping spot. Night fell like a heavy blanket over the forest, casting long shadows that danced in the flickering firelight. As they sat around the campfire, exchanging stories and laughter, they heard it, a faint whispering that seemed to come from all around them. Emily's eyes widened with fear as she whispered, "Do you hear that?" Mark scoffed, "It's probably just the wind." But Sarah, ever the leader, rose to her feet and declared, "Let's find out." They ventured into the darkness, following the whispers deeper into the woods. The trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. With each step, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were surrounded by a cacophony of voices, each one colder than the last. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath them, sending them tumbling into a hidden ravine. As they struggled to their feet, they realized they were not alone. Pale figures lurked in the shadows, their eyes gleaming with hunger. "We need to get out of here," Jake said, his voice trembling with fear. But escape seemed impossible as the whispers closed in around them, suffocating them with their icy breath. Sarah fought to keep her composure, to lead her friends to safety, but the darkness seemed to swallow them whole. Hours passed like minutes as they stumbled through the labyrinth of trees, their sanity slipping away with each passing moment. They were no longer sure if they were alive or dead, trapped in some twisted nightmare from which there was no awakening. Just when all hope seemed lost, they stumbled upon a clearing bathed in moonlight. But instead of relief, they felt a chill run down their spines as they realized where they were, the heart of Whispering Woods. In the center of the clearing stood a lone figure, cloaked in shadows. Its eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light as it spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth. "Welcome to my domain," it said, its words dripping with malice. "You have trespassed where mortals dare not tread, and now you shall pay the price." With a wave of its hand, the figure unleashed a wave of darkness that consumed them whole. They screamed as they were torn apart, their bodies merging with the very fabric of the forest itself. And as dawn broke over Whispering Woods, there was no sign of the campers, no trace of their existence save for a faint whisper on the wind, a warning to all who dare to enter the realm of the unknown. In the heart of a small town stood a massive Walmart, a beacon of convenience to its residents. Its fluorescent lights illuminated the parking lot like a moth to flame, drawing in shoppers day and night. But as the sun set and darkness enveloped the town, the Walmart transformed into something else entirely. Sarah was a college student desperate for cash. She eagerly accepted a job as a cashier for the graveyard shift at Walmart, unaware of the horrors that lurked within its walls. On her first night, she arrived at the eerily quiet store, greeted only by the flickering neon sign and the distant hum of refrigeration units. As the hours ticked by, Sarah noticed strange occurrences. Items moved on their own, whispers echoed through the aisles, and cold drafts chilled her to the bone. She brushed off these experiences as fatigue-induced hallucinations until she encountered the night janitor, Old Joe. Old Joe was a weathered man with sunken eyes and a haunted demeanor. He warned Sarah of the store's dark secret, a malevolent presence that fed on the fear of those who dared to work the night shift. Sarah laughed it off, dismissing his warnings as the ramblings of a senile old man. But as the nights passed, Sarah's skepticism waned. She witnessed shelves collapsing without cause, shadowy figures darting between aisles, and blood-curdling screams echoing from the depths of the store. Each shift became a battle for survival as Sarah navigated the treacherous maze of aisles, never knowing what horrors awaited her around the next corner. One fateful night, Sarah found herself alone in the electronics department, counting down the minutes until her shift ended. Suddenly, the TVs flickered to life, broadcasting images of her darkest fears. She tried to flee, but invisible hands held her in place as the aisles warped and twisted around her. As Sarah's screams pierced the silence, Old Joe appeared, wielding a makeshift weapon forged from cleaning supplies. With a fierce determination, he battled the malevolent entity, his aged frame moving with surprising agility. Together, they fought against the darkness, pushing it back with sheer force of will. But just as victory seemed within reach, the entity unleashed its final gambit, a wave of pure terror that threatened to consume them both. In a last-ditch effort, Sarah and Old Joe rallied their courage and faced the darkness head-on, refusing to be its victims any longer. With a deafening roar, the entity dissipated into nothingness, leaving behind only the echo of its malevolent laughter. As dawn broke and the first rays of sunlight pierced the darkness, Sarah and Old Joe emerged from the shattered remains of the store, battered but victorious. From that day forward, Sarah vowed never to return to Walmart, haunted by the memories of her nightmarish ordeal. And though the town's residents continued to flock to the store for their daily needs, few dared to linger after dark, knowing that evil lurked within its walls, waiting for its next victim to stray too close. Ordinary evening when Sarah, a college student, decided to stop by Walmart to grab some groceries. The fluorescent lights flickered as she entered, casting eerie shadows across the linoleum floor. She brushed off the feeling of unease and began her shopping. As Sarah made her way through the aisles, she couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Each time she glanced over her shoulder, she caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of her eye, only to find empty aisles behind her. She chalked it up to her imagination and continued browsing, but as she reached aisle 13, something felt different. The air grew thick with a palpable sense of dread, and the dim lighting cast long, menacing shadows that seemed to dance around her. Sarah shivered, her heart pounding in her chest, but she couldn't explain why. Pushing her cart forward, she noticed a faint whispering sound, like voices murmuring just beyond the edge of hearing. She strained to make out the words, but they were muffled and indistinct. Disconcerted, she quickened her pace, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the aisle. Suddenly, Sarah froze in her tracks. A figure loomed at the end of the aisle, its features obscured by the darkness. She squinted, trying to make out any details, but the figure remained a shadowy silhouette. "Hello?" she called out tentatively, her voice echoing through the empty store. There was no response, but the figure seemed to inch closer, its movements unnaturally slow and deliberate. Panic welled up inside Sarah as she realized that something was terribly wrong. She turned to flee, but her feet felt rooted to the spot, as if held in place by an unseen force. Desperate, Sarah reached for her phone, fumbling to dial 911, but the screen remained blank, unresponsive to her touch. With mounting terror, she watched as the figure drew nearer, its shape shifting and contorting in the dim light. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, the figure lunged forward, its form twisting and warping in a grotesque display. Sarah screamed, the sound piercing the silence of the store as she braced herself for the inevitable. But just as the figure was upon her, it dissolved into wisps of shadow, evaporating into thin air. Sarah stumbled backward, her heart racing as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. As she stood there, trembling and bewildered, she heard a voice behind her. "Are you all right, miss?" Sarah whirled around to find a Walmart employee standing there, concern etched on his face. Relief flooded through her as she realized she was no longer alone. I think so," she stammered, still reeling from the encounter. I don't know what just happened." The employee frowned, glancing around the empty aisle. "Aisle 13, he muttered under his breath. "It's always been a bit strange." Sarah's eyes widened in horror as she realized the truth. The whispers, the shadows, the figure that had pursued her, it had all been real. And now she understood why aisle 13 was always avoided, why it had earned a reputation as the most haunted aisle in the store. As she hurriedly made her way to the checkout, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching her from the darkness. And as she glanced back at aisle 13 one last time, she knew she would never forget the terrifying ordeal she had endured in the heart of Walmart. This is our story. It was a cold, rainy night, and I was on my way home from a long day at work. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, and with no groceries at home, I decided to stop at the nearest McDonald's for a quick bite. As I pulled into the drive-thru, the familiar golden arches loomed eerily against the dark sky. The speaker crackled to life, and a staticky voice greeted me, "Welcome to McDonald's. How may I take your order?" I placed my usual order, but there was no response. Thinking it was just a technical glitch, I pulled up to the window to pay. To my surprise, the drive-thru window was empty. I waited for what seemed like an eternity, but no one appeared. An uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach as I contemplated driving away. But hunger won out, and I decided to park and go inside instead. As I entered the restaurant, a chill swept over me. The interior was dimly lit, and there was an unsettling stillness in the air. I called out, but my voice echoed off the walls, unanswered. Ignoring the creeping sense of dread, I made my way to the counter. The register was unmanned, and there was no sign of any employees. I began to panic, wondering if something had happened to them. Suddenly, a door behind the counter creaked open, and a figure emerged. It was a woman, her eyes vacant and her movements jerky. She shuffled toward me, her uniform stained and torn. "Welcome to McDonald's," she intoned in a monotone voice. "How may I take your order?" I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Something was clearly wrong here, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Against my better judgment, I placed my order, and the woman wordlessly disappeared into the kitchen. Minutes stretched into eternity as I waited for my food. The restaurant seemed to grow darker with each passing moment, and I could feel eyes watching me from the shadows. Finally, the woman returned with a tray laden with food. But as she handed it to me, I recoiled in horror. The burger was oozing with a dark, viscous liquid, and the fries were blackened and charred. I stumbled backward, dropping the tray to the floor with a clatter. The woman's eyes gleamed with malice as she advanced toward me, her movements more fluid now, less robotic. "Enjoy your meal," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. With a cry of terror, I turned and fled from the restaurant, the sound of her laughter echoing in my ears. I didn't stop running until I was safely back in my car, heart pounding in my chest. As I drove away, I glanced back at the McDonald's in the rearview mirror. But to my horror, the building was no longer there. In its place stood an empty, decrepit shell, swallowed by the darkness. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that something sinister lurks beneath the surface of that McDonald's, and I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I had stayed just a little bit longer. In the heart of a small town, nestled between quaint houses and bustling streets, stood an old McDonald's restaurant. It had been a pillar of the community for decades, serving up smiles and burgers to generations of families. But behind its golden arches lay a sinister secret that only those who dared to work the night shift would uncover. Sarah was a college student, struggling to make ends meet. Desperate for cash, she applied for a job at the local McDonald's and was quickly hired for the graveyard shift. Excited to earn some extra money, she brushed off the warnings of her friends about strange occurrences at the restaurant after dark. Her first night on the job started off uneventfully. She flipped burgers, filled orders, and cleaned tables as the hours ticked by. But as the clock struck midnight, Sarah noticed something odd. A faint whisper echoed through the empty restaurant, sending shivers down her spine. She dismissed it as her imagination and continued her duties. As the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, accompanied by strange shadows that danced across the walls. Sarah's nerves were on edge, but she pushed through, determined to finish her shift. However, as she approached the bathroom to clean it, a cold chill swept over her. The door creaked open on its own, revealing a dark, empty room. Sarah hesitated but pressed on, stepping inside to begin her cleaning routine. But as she scrubbed the floors, she heard a soft sobbing coming from one of the stalls. Heart pounding, she cautiously approached, pushing open the door to reveal a figure huddled in the corner. It was a young girl, her face pale and tears streaming down her cheeks. Sarah tried to comfort her, asking what was wrong, but the girl only stared back with hollow eyes before vanishing into thin air. Terrified, Sarah stumbled backward, fleeing the bathroom in a panic. But the horrors were far from over. As she made her way back to the kitchen, she found herself face to face with another apparition. This time, it was a man in a McDonald's uniform, his expression twisted in agony. He reached out to her, mouthing words she couldn't hear before fading away into the darkness. Frantic, Sarah tried to flee the restaurant, but the doors were locked tight, trapping her inside with the restless spirits. She raced to the manager's office, hoping to find help, but what she discovered there chilled her to the bone. On the desk lay an old newspaper article detailing a tragic accident that had occurred years ago. It was the story of a young girl and her father, both employees at the McDonald's, who had died in a fire that consumed the restaurant one fateful night. Their spirits, it seemed, were doomed to wander the halls for eternity. Realization dawned on Sarah as she understood the true horror of her situation. She was not alone in the McDonald's, she was surrounded by the restless souls of the past, doomed to relive their final moments over and over again. With no way to escape, she could only pray for morning to come and release her from this nightmare. As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, Sarah stumbled out of the McDonald's, shaken but alive. She never returned to work there again, but the memory of that night would haunt her for the rest of her days, a chilling reminder of the true terror that lurked behind the familiar facade of the Golden Arches. This is